Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the January Superintendent Webcast. Happy New Year to everybody across the state. We're glad to be in 2023. We have a full agenda, so we'll jump right in. Our agenda includes communications updates. We have a little information around the private school tax credits lawsuit and what the Supreme Court ruled on that. You may have seen in the newspaper today that there's also been a lawsuit filed about House Bill 9. So Todd Allen and I will have a little dialogue about that and what we think it means. The state board and I are named as defendants in that lawsuit, so we'll have to be careful in what we say, but we can give you our statements and opinions on the matter. They won't be dramatically different than things you've heard already. We have an update from Karen Dodd and Audrey Gilbert around the United We Learn Council and some of the work that they've been doing. We have an update from EPSB. And some information from Associate Commissioner Darnell. We have had numerous questions around special education monitoring, how districts are selected annually and what the process around that looks like. So Greta Hilton and her team have prepared some guidance on that, and we're going to go over that with you. So kind of that question around how are districts selected for our special education monitoring. Dr. Woods Tucker is going to cover the Equity Playbook cohort, the group that we've got moving through that. Brian Perry is on to talk about legislative updates because it's that time of year again when the legislature's back in session, or they're briefly gavelled in and gavelled back out. But we'll be back again in February, so he'll tell you some of the things that are on deck for that. And then we already have received a couple of questions and answers. Thank you for sending in those. We'll make sure that we either answer those here with you or we'll follow up with you and make sure that you have written responses to those questions. So without any further ado, let's turn things over to Jen Yin, who has been serving as our effective communications chief while Tony Constatman has been out on medical leave. Jen has been doing a fantastic job in that role. Jen, let me turn things over to you for some comms updates.
Thanks, Commissioner. Hopefully we'll have Tony back in a couple of weeks, just so everybody knows. All right, next slide, please. All right, great news to start off with. Our 2024 Kentucky Teacher of the Year program is off and running. The nominations closed on Monday. We got 1,367 nominations, and we have received at least one nomination from every school district in Kentucky. It's second year for that, and we are really glad to have so many participating. So next in the process is the teachers who have been nominated should start receiving their packets this week. Those applications are due by February 21st. It's a little bit of a different application process this year, but there's some pretty explicit instructions in there. If there are any questions, reach out to, there's an email address in there. Please feel free to reach out and we'll help you through it. The Kentucky Teacher Achievement Award winners and finalists are going to be honored this fall, as usual, in Frankfort. And the 2024 Kentucky Teacher of the Year will serve next calendar year. That had me confused at first. I was looking at 2023. But they'll serve January 1st through December 31st. And our current Teacher of the Year is actually with us at the department right now. So we're happy to have her on board. This KDE announces winner of 32 CTE Showcase mini grants. These grants are going to help with the expenses for schools that are going to be representing the entire state at the 22-23 CTE Showcase, which is going to be at the Capitol on February 21st and at the KSBA Annual Conference on February 24th. So the funding for those mini grants is made possible through KDE's ESSER 2 funds. The showcase is intended to highlight high-quality CTE programs, and it is part of CTE month, which is February. So we're inviting all of you all to celebrate February as CTE month. If you want to see the list of schools and what programs actually they'll be representing, you can find that on Kentucky Teacher, and a link is available in the PowerPoint you were sent. We have actually received some interest from the media on this one. Is the summer food service program. We're providing training for sponsors. It's hard to think of that it's time to be thinking about summer food service in the dead of winter, but it is. We are encouraging schools and nonprofit organizations to sponsor summer food service programs and help provide free meals to Kentucky's children. You can find out more, and potential sponsors are encouraged to go to the Prospective Summer Food Service Program Sponsors Registration Form. There's a link here. So if you know of anybody who is interested in that, please share that link with them. Mandy Perez, our 2023 Teacher of the Year. She has earned a CCSSO, Council of Chief State School Officers, State Teacher of the Year honors. So she is, every year CCSSO names a Teacher of the Year from the U.S. states. The educators are taking part in professional learning opportunities for the next year. As teacher representative, she has been appointed to serve on the Coalition for Sustaining the Profession. Next slide. All right, we have named Kentucky students for the 2023 U.S. Senate Youth Program. We sent out a press release about this a little while back. You may have seen it. David Daniel, junior at Owensboro High School, and Hing Yang, a senior at Conner High School in Boone County, were selected to be part of the 104 student delegation to the United States Senate Youth Program. I know this is a pretty intensive process that the students go through, so we just want to thank all of the students that participated in it. Daniel and Yang. Okay. Let me see. They're going to be representing Kentucky during 61st annual Washington Week. It's March 4th through the 11th. Zachary Clifton, a junior at Corbin High School, and Audrey Gilbert, a senior at Frankfort High School. You'll be hearing from her in a little bit. Were chosen as alternates. So congratulations to all the students who participated and to our winners and alternates. We have the nominations open for the 2023 Robinson Award for Diversity and Equity in Public Education. Those close on the 23rd. The award is granted annually to a Kentuckian or Kentucky organization demonstrating extraordinary efforts and contributions in the area of educational diversity and equity. So you see the link there to make nominations if you can think of someone that is deserving of being nominated or an organization, please share that with us. And we're back to the commissioner.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Great job filling in. Appreciate all your efforts, not just today, but over the past month. You've been fantastic in filling the gap with Tony out. Todd and I wanted to have a conversation around the Supreme Court ruling on House Bill 563 that came out earlier in December. We haven't had a chance to dialogue that with all of you. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what the Supreme Court ruling did, some about the process that 563 went through in the courts, what all was included in 563, what was covered in the Supreme Court ruling and what was not covered. And then we'll turn our attention to House Bill 9 that's now in law, the charter school bill, and the pending lawsuit about that. So Todd, let me turn things over to you to kind of give everyone some of the backstory on House Bill 563, the open borders bill that also included those provisions around tax credits, to tell some of that story and what's happened with the courts with it.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon, Superintendents. The first thing I think to keep in mind is that House Bill 563 means different things to different folks. There are really two big buckets of content that were included in House Bill 563. Typically, when us in school districts and in the education community talk about House Bill 563, we're talking about it in terms of what the commissioner called open borders that allowed interdistrict transfer without a non-resident student agreement in order for students to be included in SEEK. Another significant portion of House Bill 563 what is known as the Education Opportunity Tax Credit accounts, and that is what was subject to challenge before the courts. So those two big pieces that we're talking about, one was before the courts, the Education Opportunity Account tax credits. One was not, and that is the non-resident student transfer and attendance. So big picture takeaway, the rulings by the courts, both at the lower level and the Kentucky Supreme Court, did not impact the new law that's in place around interdistrict transfer of students. So if you have a student in a neighboring district that is enrolled in and attending your school district, that is still permitted under House Bill 563, and a non-resident student agreement is not required to be in place with their district of residence. That is not impacted. The challenge before the courts was related to the tax credit that was provided under the Education Opportunity Account. And in very brief summary, what House Bill 563 allowed was for individuals to make contributions to an account granting organization, is what it was called, that was set up through the Department of Revenue. And for their contributions, they got a dollar for dollar tax credit. Of course, a tax credit is different than a tax deduction. A tax deduction reduces your taxable income. That is the amount of income that you have to pay taxes on. Whereas a tax credit takes the amount of money that you owe the state in taxes and reduces it dollar for dollar. So if you owed $500 and you got a $100 tax credit, then you only paid the Commonwealth $400 instead. That was challenged on numerous constitutional grounds before the Franklin Circuit Court, and they entered an order holding that House Bill 563, those tax credit scholarship portions of the law, were unconstitutional on two grounds. First, under Section 59 of the Kentucky Constitution, which prohibits special legislation. The General Assembly is not permitted to pass special legislation that impacts a certain locality regarding the common school system, and then also under Section 184 of the Constitution that provides that raising or collecting any amount of money for education other than in the common schools is prohibited unless it's been put before the voters of the Commonwealth and it prevails there at a vote. So the Supreme Court then took up the matter. The parties bypassed the Kentucky Court of Appeals. We have a three-step system. You've got the Circuit Court. Franklin Circuit Court heard this matter and ruled it unconstitutional under two provisions of the Kentucky Constitution. The parties bypassed the Kentucky Court of Appeals. That's permitted in certain situations when they can show that it's going to ultimately go to the Supreme Court and that time is of the essence. So they exercised a procedural workaround there to bypass the Kentucky Court of Appeals and go directly to the Kentucky Supreme Court. And the Kentucky Supreme Court unanimously struck down the tax credit scholarship provision of House Bill 563 under Section 184 of the Constitution. So the Supreme Court said that 184 of the Constitution was dispositive of the entire matter. They didn't even need to get to Section 59 regarding special legislation, so they didn't, and we don't know how they would have held, whether they would have agreed with the lower court on that or not. But higher courts of review will typically only take up one issue. If they can decide an entire matter on one issue, then they don't get to the other issues, and that's what they did here. So essentially, the Supreme Court once again reiterated that the interdistrict transfer provisions of House Bill 563 were not impacted either at the Franklin Circuit Court or at the Kentucky Supreme Court, and that Section 184 of the Constitution was dispositive of this matter. The court said, again, no sum shall be raised or collected for education other than in the common schools unless it's put to the voters. The court said if this if the General Assembly believes that this is such a worthwhile program that the voters of the Commonwealth would support it, then they need to put it on the ballot for voters to vote on. But as it stands, it would put the Commonwealth in the business of raising money for education other than in the common schools. The opinion went into some detail about the work that would be required of the Department of Revenue in establishing these account granting organizations. And of course, they said, despite arguments to the contrary, that because this is a tax credit and not actually a tax increase or a specific tax related to the programs, they said we're not going to split hairs related to that. What it is money that would otherwise be going into public coffers that would be available for public education and is now not available for public education because of this tax credit. So therefore, they found it to be raising or collecting any sum for education other than in the common schools. Again, we'll see if the Supreme Court, or I'm sorry, if the General Assembly attempts to do something different on this in future sessions or not. They could attempt to put together a different package that's slightly different and see if it would pass muster of the courts, or they could do as the court suggested and try to put the matter on the ballot for vote. But as we stand right now, the account granting organizations and the tax credit scholarships that were previously set forth in House Bill 563 are dead in the water, so to speak. And now we will wait to see if the General Assembly does something different.
Thanks, Todd. Excellent and thorough analysis, as we would expect from you. It seems like in some of the articles that have been published by either nonprofits in support of the tax credit structure or politicians in support of it, they're sort of making the argument that, well, this has been approved in other states, therefore it should be approved here or should be legal here. The Supreme Court in Kentucky seems to say that the mechanism or the scheme of reducing taxes in Kentucky in order to create an account to fund private schools is really just kind of a shell game scheme. Effectively, you are moving public funds into private schools, and that, in their opinion, that pierces or that violates the state constitution. The remedy would be to one of the possible remedies would be for the legislators to put this on the ballot. Do you have any thoughts on the arguments around that it has been legal in other states and therefore it should be legal here?
Well, the parties in this matter actually briefed that extensively, and the court commented on it in its opinion. I think that Alabama was the state that was pointed to by the Attorney General's office, saying that the state of Alabama has passed similar legislation, and it was challenged before the Alabama Supreme Court and upheld to be constitutional. The Supreme Court went through quite a bit of analysis, but in short, basically said, we're not Alabama. Our Constitution is slightly different than that in Alabama, and we don't speak for Alabama, but here in Kentucky, we don't find this to be in line with the Kentucky Constitution. If you actually go and read the opinion of the court, they start at the very beginning, the Constitutional Conference for the current Constitution of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And they go back to the history of the days that were devoted, and it was multiple days devoted to the sections on public education. And really, it seems that they wish to honor the work of the framers of the Kentucky Constitution in really protecting public education in the state. And I think they put a lot of effort into that, and their unanimous decision was pretty clear on that matter as well. So for those who are interested, there is a long analysis comparing rulings from the Alabama Supreme Court in their similar legislation to what we have here. But at the end of the day, the Kentucky Supreme Court said, we're not Alabama, and that's not flying here.
Great. And so it seems to be that the state Supreme Court is sort of applying this conservative doctrine of originalism to the Kentucky Constitution and saying that it was written at a time when at a time of public schools and funding for public schools was the context in which this was written. Therefore, that's how it should be interpreted now.
Yes, that's what it appears to be. If you go and read the opinion of the court, like I said, going back to all the way back to the constitutional debates as our Constitution was formed in the state, around the importance of public education and providing free public education to everyone within the Commonwealth, and how important that was to the framers of our Constitution. Obviously, they put specific provisions in place to guard against public funds being used for schools other than the common schools. And this is how we see the court interpreting that.
We did have a specific question around how this ruling related to the open borders provision that was in House Bill 563. I think you clarified that it does not impact that. It was only related to the tax credits component. So that was what was written into the Supreme Court opinion. And we actually had a clarification from the Franklin Court on that same matter, I believe. Could you talk about what, if any, next steps legally exist when it comes to a challenge to the Kentucky State Constitution?
Well, there is none. The Kentucky Supreme Court is the highest level to make a constitutional challenge to the state constitution. So that's done. The only other option would be to amend the Kentucky Constitution, and that requires a ballot initiative. It has to be approved by the voters.
Okay, great. Let's shift gears a little bit, Todd, and talk about House Bill 9. Of course, this was the charter school bill that was passed last year. It included a few provisions that changed the structure around how charter schools operate and are authorized in the state. And it created these two contemplated the creation of these two pilot charter schools in Jefferson County and in northern Kentucky. We've received word that a lawsuit is forthcoming related to this. The commissioner, myself, and the state board and Chair Young are ostensibly to be named as the defendants in that. We haven't had a chance to see, unless something's happened in the last few hours, haven't had a chance to see that yet, but we are expecting it, and it's being reported in the media already. But I wonder if you could relay just what the department's position is on this, any statement that we would make on it, just as our general counsel.
Certainly. Well, as you said, Commissioner, at this point in time, none of the parties, while this is circulating in the media, who are arguably defendants, have actually been served with the complaint in this matter. So really, it's somewhat speculative as to what it would provide or what it's going to argue. I think, very simply put, we have a situation where the Kentucky General Assembly passed House Bill 9. It was on a rather thin margin. However, it did pass and it became law. And it provided very prescriptive instructions to the State Board of Education to promulgate administrative regulations. The state board wrestled with that at its October meeting and ultimately executed and carried out its sworn duty to faithfully implement the laws of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and it put those charter school regulations in place. So really, any challenge to the regulations would be a challenge to the legislation itself. To the extent there are constitutional questions, they're questions with House Bill 9 that was passed by the Kentucky General Assembly. Obviously, we would wait to see exactly what any type of lawsuit would provide, but to the extent that House Bill 9 is challenged from a constitutional perspective, which specific provisions a plaintiff would challenge, we don't know at this point in time. We do understand there are constitutional questions that exist, and I think that some clarifications from the court would be great for everybody involved, however it may turn out, so we understand exactly how the court looks at this from a constitutional perspective. We welcome that input. Of course, neither the state board nor the commissioner can speak for the actions of the General Assembly, defend those actions, or argue them in this situation. But we'll see what turns out in the event that we are in fact served with a copy of a lawsuit, and respond accordingly.
Thank you, Todd. And I think going just a little further, while we haven't seen the case yet, we have noted the operational and the constitutional questions that we have with it. Some of those we made the legislature aware of during the session that it was being considered. Those concerns that we raised were not taken into account or even acknowledged. So the law passed through largely unmodified. The same concerns have been raised by the LSAC committee and by the state board as they carried out their responsibility in putting in place these the regulations associated with House Bill 9. But could you speak some around our plan on responding to a lawsuit, assuming that it comes in challenging the constitutional grounds that we've outlined previously?
Well, first of all, we would say that, the commissioner and the state board and the state board's members have acted in good faith to carry out their sworn duty in this situation. So we really can't, we would defend any of their actions based on that. They were specifically instructed to promulgate regulations by the General Assembly. They carried out that duty and they did so. The constitutionality of House Bill 9 itself, state law provides that the Attorney General can intervene in any matter to defend the constitutionality of a law that's passed by the General Assembly. So that would really be the role of the Attorney General in this situation, to argue that House Bill 9 is constitutional. Again, we don't know which sections of the Kentucky Constitution would be called into question in this situation, but make any arguments about the constitutionality of House Bill 9. And, obviously we would focus more on the actions of the commissioner and the state board, and that they acted in good faith in carrying out their sworn duty.
Okay, great. Thank you, Todd. Great analysis on these two complex matters. We did have one question come in related to House Bill 563. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up and have you answer that now. And it relates to students from outside the state of Kentucky and them coming in using 563 as a mechanism to come into the state. Did 563 contemplate out-of-state students, or how should that be handled? That was a question that came in.
Yeah, it did not. I think that may be some confusion, actually. So there is no right of any non-resident of the Commonwealth of Kentucky to attend our public schools. That simply does not exist. House Bill 563 and its non-resident student transfer provisions didn't precisely state that, but that's really a constitutional provision. So we can't use the funds, the common school funds of the Commonwealth of Kentucky to educate students who aren't Commonwealth residents. So to the extent that any of your districts have students who are not residents of the state attempting to enroll, they have no right to do so in your schools, and arguably should not be using state school funds in order for them to attend. If you were to permit them to enroll, it should be with them paying the full cost of tuition for their attendance within the school district.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Todd. We appreciate you covering all this, and we'll now turn things over to Karen Dodd and Audrey Gilbert. Karen's our Chief Performance Officer. Audrey is the interim chair of the Kentucky United We Learn Council, and they'll give you an update on some of the work that group's been doing.
Thank you, Commissioner. We had our first meeting for the United We Learn Council in November. You have probably heard about that. So at that meeting, Audrey Gilbert was elected to be the interim chair. As the members get to know each other better, at a later meeting, we will elect another chair, but we thought it was an excellent idea to have a student represent the council right now. And so that's Audrey, and we are thrilled to have her as our interim chair. She's going to go through with you a little bit about what happened in that meeting from her perspective, and a couple of the meetings from the standing committees that have met so far since that meeting. Audrey?
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. The November convening happened on November 29th and 30th this past year. we had a few superintendents there for showcasing their work, and a few were members on the council as well. The council talked about the purpose of the council, the future of education in Kentucky, and how we can further implement the vision of United We Learn. We looked at what's happening in the state right now, some really innovative ideas that are happening in our districts all around the state, and how those ideas can be brought to the state level and used to help all schools come into this innovative mindset. So at the convening, we also met with our committees. Everybody was assigned to their appropriate committees, met with them for the first time, and established a big, hairy, audacious goal. And that's the goal for the first 6 months or so of the committee, just to get acquainted with their task and to understand what their goal is. So we've had 2 committees meet so far. We have one that will be meeting later in December, but the Vibrant Learning Experiences Committee met very first in December on the 19th. They were the most eager to get started, right away. And then Accelerating Innovation met yesterday. So the next slide should cover what happened in one of those committee meetings. So this talks about the Vibrant Learning Experiences Committee. Like I said, they met back in December. They'll be meeting again later this month, and you can watch all of that on the media portal. And this committee talked about their goal, expanded on what they want to do, got into some more of the details of that, and also looked at how they're going to elect chairs. Each of our committees will have a chair that is a member of the council, so that we can ensure meaningful stakeholder inclusion. As you can read there, they talked about how they can gain a universal understanding of student learning experiences in the state so that they can embark on their work being well informed. And their next meeting will be on January 30th. Next slide, yeah. All right, and then the Accelerating Innovations Committee met yesterday. And they did pick a chair. Kathy Stovall from Louisville and their co-chair, Sarah Hatton from Adair County, are going to serve and lead that committee through the next year, I believe. And this committee talked about their goals again and just how they're going to complete those. They talked about their committee charter, which was something that got started at the convening, but really should be getting finished up very soon, making sure that those goals are aligned and that the committee is sustainable for the future, and that the goals are set in place and that everyone is aware of what those are. They also worked on their big, hairy, audacious goal and made sure that everybody was aware of what that was and marked their progress on that. And they talked in groups and talked about how they're going to collect information to build that universal understanding of vibrant learning experiences in Kentucky. Assessment and accountability in Kentucky. And figure out where they need to go in the future. And they will meet again in February. And then our next committee is the Building a Bold New Future Committee. They have not met yet since the convening. They will meet on January 23rd. So you can also view that on the KDE media portal. And I'll pass it back to Karen.
Thanks, Audrey. So the things that we have going on right now, we're working on a monthly newsletter that will be sent out to everyone. Anybody who wants to read that is welcome to. It will include greetings from our interim chair for now. It will also have some updates. So just like we shared with you today, the updates from those standing committees, it will include that along with links to the web pages that we've created for each one of those standing committees. So the Cool Council itself has a web page, and then there are links on that page to the standing committees. All of these meetings are being live streamed and recorded, so you can go to our media portal at any time and either watch live or watch the recordings at a later date. We're also going to include in that newsletter some introductions of the members. So you'll see we have 72 members right now, and so each newsletter will introduce several of those members. I do include a link here to the United We Learn Cool Council United We Learn Council webpage is linked here for you. Our next convening will be in April. It's on the 25th and 26th, and that will be held in Shelby County at the Blair Center. That will be live streamed as well, and a recording will be available on that website. That's it for now, Commissioner.
All right. Thank you, Karen. Great job. And thank you, Audrey. And for those that don't know, Audrey is also a student at Frankfort High School. And so is that right, Frankfort or Franklin County?
Frankfort.
Frankfort High School. Thank you. And so we thought it would be really important for the committee's starting work, or the council starting work, to begin under the leadership of a student. It really is a signal of how important we value student voice through this process. And so we're really proud of Audrey's participation in this group. We'll now transition over to Dr. Byron Darnell, Associate Commissioner over the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness. Dr. Darnell has some exciting changes that have been put forth by the EPSB to cover with you. Dr. Darnell, take it away.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon and Happy New Year to each and every one of you. Audrey, if you'd like to just go ahead and advance. Just a few points of interest that I thought I would just bring to your attention today. At the December meeting, the Educational Professional Standards Board expanded licensure assessments to include a -1 standard error of measurement for the praxis assessments. So essentially, this is going to create a band for those that are seeking full licensure. So an example would be if the cut score for a particular exam is set at 160, that would create a band between 155 and 160 as a qualifying score. So the board wants to monitor this action between now and December 30th of 2023 in order to just fact find and see how this potentially increases those that are able to achieve full licensure, and then of course make further determinations moving forward. They also approved the use of the Praxis Performance Assessment for Teachers, or PPAT, which, as it states in the title, it is a performance-based exam that is also included in this expansion. The caveat with the performance assessment is the institution will need to participate since it comes with an element of training, and the PPAT is completed during their student teaching window. So the institution will need to allow that within the purview of their decision window. But we have the two options that the board would like to see how this impacts the educator pipeline and those that are reaching full licensure, and then be able to make an informed decision perhaps more permanently after next December, and or reconsider extending the period out a little longer to see if we need to gather more information on its impact. Just a couple of other notes of interest. The Kentucky Educator Credential System, or KECS as we name it, has now been fully engaged to send out notifications for those that need to update your credentials, your license. So if it is coming due, the notification system is meant to send an early warning to you to let you know that they will come due. Typically, it will be the June 30th date. And we're hopeful that this will inspire individuals to research in a timely manner and not get caught off guard or forget at the last minute, in order to spread out the work, if you will, so that, you know, the peak times in the summer can be geared more toward those that are seeking new licensure, out-of-state licensure, and those that are just renewing will have a chance to do so before that time occurs. So hopefully the KECS early warning system has sent something out to individuals in your districts. One thing to just note is if when you applied or signed into either the old system or the new system, if you used an email perhaps from a district that you are no longer in, we do find that being a bit of a barrier. So if individuals are using a prior school email as their login, but of course that email is no longer active, most likely, or should be. So just please note that it is best to use a personal email for this, something that you're attached to for the long term. So therefore, the information that we're trying to get out is done successfully. One highlight to note, celebration is we have had 22% increase in the National Board Certified Teachers in Kentucky. So just want to give a shout out to each of you all for promoting that within your districts. And Kentucky is on the rise and gathering a larger pool of nationally board certified teachers. Thank you all, and I just appreciate the chance to give you a little information today. Dr. Glass?
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Darnell. That's some changes that have been long sought for in Kentucky related to licensure, and thanks to the members of the EPSB for putting that in place, and thanks to your team for supporting that. We'll now turn things over to Greta Hilton, who's our Associate Commissioner over the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. Hi, Greta.
Hi, Commissioner.
Hi,
Thank you.
welcome. And over the past couple of months, you and your team have been working on some guidance that I think we're ready to release now around the question of how districts are selected for special education monitoring. I think there has been this view that districts are selected for special education monitoring based on who we don't like at KDE. And so I'll explode that myth by saying we like all of our districts here at KDE, and we love all of our districts and want them all to be successful. So it is absolutely not the case that we have a list and you get on the list based on our feelings for any particular district or person. But there is a process around the selection for special education monitoring, and they're different processes for that monitoring based on different aspects of federal law and IDEA. And so we wonder if you could spend just a few minutes going through the processes of identification that exist. Some of those have triggers in place, some of them have record reviews, some of them we conduct the monitoring, sometimes it's the districts doing it themselves and reporting back to us. There's a whole mixture of different ways that this happens. So we'll turn things over to you for some update on that. And then also, if you could let us know when that guidance document is going to be available so people can refer to it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And, to the commissioner's point around, we like all of you. We love all of our special education programs across the state. And I will just give a shout out for all the work that you do in your special education programs. As I've shared repeatedly, Kentucky is only one of 22 states that continue to receive a meets requirement on its state annual determination, which is essentially our report card for how we're performing as a state. One of 22, approximately 60 states and entities. So it's a pretty awesome but underwhelming term. Meets requirements it sounds a little less than it is when it's as good as you can do. And really that's because of the work that's occurring in your district. So we'll go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So this slide really just takes us through the IDEA and what the IDEA is. I want to give you just a little bit of background before we jump into the selection process. The IDEA is a federal law that ensures that states continue to make available a free, appropriate public education to students with disabilities. And it's a requirement for states as well as a requirement for districts. And we have approximately 7.5 million eligible students across the nation that are receiving special education and related services. Next slide. And on this slide is the number of students that we have within the state of Kentucky receiving special education and related services. And you can see there on your screen that we have a total of 109,672 students receiving services. And this is broken into the 14 eligibility categories in preschool as well as school-age students. One of the things that I will call your attention to on this slide is that you'll notice the largest category of students receiving services is speech language, and there's just over 29,000 students there. And then I would call your attention to the MMD and FMD, which is mild and functional mental disability categories. These are the only two categories where students have a known cognitive or intellectual disability. So all that to say, approximately 85% of our students with disabilities that are receiving services through an IEP should be performing as well as their same age peers without disabilities. Next slide, please. So before we jump into who gets selected for monitoring, I want to talk just briefly about why we monitor. The IDEA is a federally funded program, and as with most federally funded programs, all states, including Kentucky, must be monitored by the feds for oversight and implementation of special education programs. As a matter of fact, we are actually in Kentucky going through a monitoring visit currently from the Office of Special Education Programs at US Ed. And likewise, federal law requires states to exercise oversight and monitoring for local school districts within the jurisdiction of the state. And if you're really into reading federal law, you can find more out about that at 34 CFR 300-600. Next slide, please. And it's the same within the state. In Kentucky, we have a long history of monitoring. So for example, in 2008, the Kentucky Board of Education promulgated the regulations that ensure implementation of the IDEA. Next slide. So to jump into special education monitoring, when asked the question, how are districts selected for monitoring, it's important to look at the ways in which that we do exercise the general supervision responsibilities of the IDEA. And on the slide in front of you are the 4 types of programmatic monitoring that we currently do. There's the local education agency annual determination, which is essentially a form of monitoring, and every single one of your districts receive annual determinations each year, and the vast majority of your local programs actually meets requirements as well. We have risk-focused monitoring, alternate assessment participation, and we also do a review of district submitted data that you send to us that populate our IDEA state performance plan and annual performance report. So I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn Morrison, who is the director of the IDEA Monitoring and Results Division, and she's going to share a little bit more information about what these types of monitoring, what these activities are. And then Chris Thacker, who is a special consultant around data, and he's going to talk with you specifically around the methodologies that we use in each of these categories for additional monitoring. So I will turn it over to you, Carolyn.
All right, thank you, Greta. As Greta stated, every district receives an LEA annual determination. States are required to make determinations each year on the special education performance of the local school districts that are within the state. And this year, the determinations that were sent out June 30th of 2022, we had 94% of districts that received a meets requirements, which is the highest mark for the determination. So excellent job to districts for their hard work that they continue to put into their special education program. Risk-focused monitoring is a differentiated monitoring process that is risk-based and individualized. It really focuses on providing individualized supports and focus in the district that is being monitored. It includes desk reviews and an on-site visit to provide technical assistance and support to the districts. There are 2 main data sources used for risk-focused monitoring, and that includes the LEA annual determinations and the risk assessment rubric. And there are links on the slides for you to access additional information about both of those. And then the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool utilizes the data that comes from risk-focused monitoring to inform the guidance and support they develop to provide for districts. There are 2 ways that a district could be identified for risk-focused monitoring. So if one of these applies, then the district is identified. So the first one is that the district receives anything less than a meets requirements on that LEA annual determination, and the district has not received an on-site monitoring visit in the last 2 years or more. Then that district would be identified for a risk-focused monitoring visit. The other data source, remember I told you that we look at, is the risk assessment rubric. And so if a district has not been monitored through an on-site visit in the last 5 years or more, and they are in the top 5% of districts with the greatest risk based on the risk assessment rubric score, then that district is identified for a risk-focused monitoring visit. Less than 10 districts were identified for risk-focused monitoring during the 2022-2023 school year, and each of these districts were notified in August of the upcoming visit. Alternate assessment participation focuses on the decisions for students to participate in the alternate assessment. And we conduct off-site desk reviews based on participation data. If that data reveals any type of disproportionality in the percentage of students participating in the alternate assessment, or we look at all other districts and randomly select 10% of those districts to conduct desk reviews. And that randomization is accomplished through using an online randomizer. And we have the link there to the one that we use, which is random.org. The IDEA requires each state to develop a state performance plan, and that plan is a 6-year plan that describes the state's efforts and Kentucky's effort to implement the IDEA and how will Kentucky improve its implementation. That state performance plan includes 17 different indicators that are determined by the Office of Special Education Program. And then each year around February 1st, Kentucky is required to report on the progress toward meeting annual goals in the annual performance report. As I mentioned, those 17 indicators are determined by the Office of Special Education Programs, and they measure a mix of student outcomes and compliance with the requirements of the IDEA. There are 6 compliance indicators included in the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report, and the targets for these indicators are set by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs. And you'll see on the you'll see in the table on the screen that 3 of those compliance indicator targets are set at 0%, and the other 3 are set at 100%. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Thacker to share some additional information with you about these compliance indicators.
Thank you, Carol Ann. Appreciate that. I'm going to discuss, as Carol Ann indicated, some of the particular indicators, and I want to start with those indicators that have that 0% target. And what that 0% target refers to is that they don't want, and they being the IDA requirements and the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report, any violations of what we're looking at. In indicator 4B, we're looking specifically at the discrepancies by race and ethnicity when we remove students with disabilities to an out-of-school removal for greater than 10 days. We look at that by individual race categories. At the federal level, there are 7 different races and ethnicities. We use data that comes from you, from your child count, and from the Safe Schools report. So it's data that you enter into Infinite Campus, essentially, that gets pulled in and looked at to make that review. When we look at that data, what we're looking to see is there some type of discrepancy in the rate at which students of particular race ethnicities are being removed for greater than 10 days. We set a state target that was based upon historical data around the percentage of removals of students with disabilities for out-of-school removal is greater than 10 days, and look to see if an individual district for any of those 7 race ethnicities are removing students of a particular race 3 times or more greater than that state target rate. And as I said, that state target rate was kind of based upon the historical average of the number of those removals. So if you get identified here through the data process, we're looking at rates that are 3 times the normal for a particular race ethnicity. We'll go on to the next slide. The first slide, the first step in that is looking at that data to see if data-wise there is a discrepancy in the number or the percentage of, for example, Black special education students or Hispanic special education students or white special education students. See if there's a difference in the percent of which they're being removed versus that target rate. If you meet that criteria for any of the 7, then we look at your policies and procedures to see if they are consistent with federal and state laws and regulations. If they are, then we look to see, are your practices aligned with those policies and procedures that you have in place for making these types of removals? If they are, if your procedures and policies are okay and your practices are okay, even if you have that discrepancy in data, you don't get identified for noncompliance here. But if the data are askew and if the policies, practices, and procedures, one of those three are not appropriate as far as being aligned with federal and state laws and regulations, then you get identified with that non-compliance for indicator 4B. And it would be for any of the particular race ethnicity categories for which that occurs. Move on to indicator 9. This is disproportionate representation. It's kind of similar in that we're looking at disproportionality or discrepancy, if you will. We're looking at it by race. And for indicator 9, we're looking at the identification of students as a student with a disability, regardless of what that disability is. Again, we use your own local data from the child count that you've entered in Infinite Campus. We look at enrollment data that you have for all students based upon their race. And then in this case, we look to see, are we identifying particular race ethnicities at rates significantly greater than students not of that race ethnicity? And that threshold there is 2.25%. So if you're identifying, for example, Hispanic students for special education at a rate that's 2.25 times the rate of any other race ethnicity, then you've met that data criteria. We look at it again for each of the 7 race categories. Go on to the next slide, please. Much like we did a while ago in indicator 4B, we look at what do we do with that information. Once you've met that threshold data-wise, where do we go next? You'll see here, did you change the slide? Yeah, okay. You see here that we've got the review process that's in place, much like we had previously. It does use the word inappropriate identification, but inappropriate isn't something that we arbitrarily came up with here. I think that's the language that's used in the actual SBP APR, but it just refers to, are you consistent or inconsistent with the IDA and its regulations that go along with it? So we examine those policies and procedures again. See if they're in order. If they are, then we look to see the practices. Are the practices in order? As with indicator 4B, if policies, procedures, and practice are appropriate, even if you have that disproportionality, you don't get identified. However, if you are disproportionate and one of those policies, practices, or procedures don't align with the federal requirements or the state laws and regulations, then you will be identified with the non-compliance for indicator 9 in any of the race ethnicities for which both of those exist. We'll move on to indicator 10. It's almost identical to indicator 9. The only difference is here, we're looking at specific disability categories. And Greta showed you earlier a list of all the 14 different disability categories in Kentucky. We look at 6 of those, although we merged the FMD and MMD population that Greta mentioned initially, and we can look at those as an intellectual disability. And then we look at 5 other disability categories separately. At each of those 6 areas, we examine the data that you put in your child count and that you put in your enrollment data. We look to see, is there that same discrepancy? Are we identifying any particular race or ethnicities for that disability category at a rate at least 2.25 times the rate of students not of that race and ethnicity? So if you meet then that criteria, move on to the next slide. Then we apply step 2, that policy, procedure, and practices process. Same things in place. If everything is okay in your policies, procedures, and practices, you don't get identified. If there are issues that are inconsistent with federal law, state law, and all the regulations and requirements that go along with that, then you will be identified with the non-compliance for the particular race or ethnicity in the particular disability category for which that occurs. And it could be multiple areas, but that's the criteria for that. And each of these 3 indicators had that 0% target. In other words, the federal government doesn't want this to ever occur anywhere in any of these categories. Indicator 11, which is child find, it looks at the percent of children who are evaluated within 60 school days of receiving that parental consent for the initial evaluation for special education. This, again, is self-reported data. However, it isn't data that comes from Infinite Campus directly. You complete, when I say you, at the local level, you complete data on the students in your district who have been referred for special education, when that referral occurred, and we follow that timeline. We'll move on to the next slide, please. We at KDE accept 90% of that self-reported data. If it's 100%, if you say you were 100% compliant, we accept 90% of that. We will randomly select 10% of the districts who reported 100% compliance. Well, what that means is if you didn't report 100% compliance, we accept all of it. We accept your acknowledging that you weren't compliant with that requirement. But if you said that you were 100% compliant, then we randomly select 10% of those districts to review that information. And then we will make a determination based upon that review as to whether or not noncompliance exists for those districts that reported 100% compliance. The next indicator is child transition, and that's when we have a child that is birthed through 2 that may have been receiving special education under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act under what's called Part C for infants and toddlers. As those children transition into the Part B program, which local school districts implement, that begins at age 3. When that child is in the Part C program, a referral may come to your local district that identifies little Johnny as potentially a student who may be eligible for services under Part B. Ideally, they would let you know before their 3rd birthday and enough time to complete that eligibility determination. So we look to see, was that in place? Did the child go through the evaluation process, the identification process, and identified by their 3rd birthday and receiving services under Part B? Once again, we use data that you report to us. In fact, it's the same spreadsheet that you complete for Indicator 11. It's just a different tab on that same spreadsheet. We go through the same process we did with Indicator 11, looking at if you say you were out of compliance, we take your word for it. There is a non-compliance written. If you say that you're 100% within compliance, we randomly select 10% of all the districts and review that to make determinations if non-compliance exists in those areas as well. The next indicator, 13, again, it uses that same spreadsheet, yet another tab on it, where districts self-report their data. This is around the percent of students ages 16 and older who might have annual goals in their IEPs that are appropriate for transition assessment services and courses. Same process we go through that we did with indicators 11 and 12. And if we'll go to the next slide, where we accept, if you report that you have a non-compliance, we accept that, and that is the finding. If you report that you are 100% within compliance, we randomly select 10% of those districts and make a review there, and we'll make a finding based upon that review. And that's how the process works data-wise. We're always using your data. It's not data that we come up with here arbitrarily, and the process isn't something that was arbitrarily derived at either. Carol Ann?
Thank you, Chris. And you will see on your screen some links to resources that are located on the KDE website. These are new resources for the current school year. You'll also see my contact information, and we will have a condensed brief available to share by next week. We wanted to ensure you had an opportunity to provide feedback today before we finalize that and send that out. So if you have any questions or need any additional information, please feel free to reach out to me, and my contact information is available on the screen.
Okay, thank you, OCL team, for that in-depth review. We'll have that information available for you and on our guidance section of our website, so we'll make that available. Now we're going to shift over to Dr. Woods-Tucker to talk about the Equity Playbook cohort. Dr. Woods-Tucker, go right ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Glass, and good afternoon and welcome to 2023 to everyone. I shall be very brief. This coming Thursday and Friday, January 12th and 13th, we will begin our in-person training for the Equity Playbook that's going to take place at NKCES that's on Alexandra Pike in Cold Spring, Kentucky. And the 2-day training will run from 9 a.m. until 12:30 p.m. And we also have a virtual option available via Zoom. This second cohort, we have the pleasure of welcoming approximately 10 new districts to join cohort 1, and we have already begun accepting districts for cohort number 3. Please feel free to reach out to me or any members of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging team, if you will, in the Office of Teaching and Learning if you are interested. As you all know, we had made accommodations for about 70 districts. We're not quite halfway there yet, but we're certainly looking to add additional districts. But with that said, our primary focus really has been on reaching more school district staff. We're proud to say that we have provided professional learning opportunities for nearly 200 individuals, utilizing research-based practices, executive coaching in one of the 5 areas that your district or your school may be experiencing that you want to really increase. And so we're extremely happy about that, that we have a greater focus on reaching a number of individuals. And again, this professional development training is free. It's made possible through our federal grants and the great support by the commissioner, and certainly through Robin Kinney's office in providing these federal funds to address student learning gaps and also opportunity gaps for all students. The next thing I want to remind you all of, and it's different from the equity playbook, but I'll be very brief here. As you all know, the Kentucky Department of Education has a myriad of opportunities and professional learning activities for school districts, and they're made free. They're available on our webpage, and this work has actually been a labor of love and collaboration with organizations like your local school districts, the Ed Co-op, as well as the Council for Post-Secondary Higher Ed. With that group, we have created the A4 modules, and many of your districts have staff participate in those module trainings. And we are on module number 3, acceptance. And so we're really excited about that. And that training began Monday of this week. So happy about that. And the last thing that I want to talk with you all about is the AP African American history course. This past year, this year, 2022-23, the AP group, the College Board, started a pilot study for African American history. Kentucky had 2 districts to take part this year. Many of your districts have received invitations to be part of Pilot 2. And then next year, the AP course will go fully live. I would encourage you for 2 reasons, and I'm speaking as a former superintendent, that you at least explore this possibility. One, it gives all of our students an opportunity to better understand and respect the cultural contributions of various groups that have shaped America, that have shaped this world. And 2, it carries out the metaphor that we use here in the Kentucky Department of Education, windows, mirrors, and sliding doors, where students have an opportunity to have a voice, but also see themselves represented in the curriculum and in academia. And then the second part is probably, or certainly less important, is that we're all, as superintendents, we're all trying to provide great opportunities for our students and to showcase various course offerings. And we do that obviously through our report card. We are doing that now through the portrait of a graduate. But also, many of us have taken advantage and told our stories in U.S. News and World Reports through the rankings and through the College Board's AP Honor Roll. By increasing the number of students and your offerings for AP, you certainly increase and you illuminate your school and your district. So again, please consider this year and certainly the future of bringing in an AP African American history course. And Commissioner Glass, that concludes my comments for today.
Thank you, Dr. Woodstucker. Excellent work on the equity playbook and the cohorts moving forward. And congratulations on the launch of the A3 module. We'll look forward to that. Let's turn things over to Brian Perry, our Director of Government Relations. The legislature was back in town last week. They're out of town this week, but they have plans to come back. What are they going to be doing, Brian?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone. As the Commissioner said, the legislature was in session last week. They gavelled out on Friday, so part 1 came to a close. This is a 30-day short session. So they will be back on Tuesday, February 7th. They will then go pretty much straight through until Sine Die on March 30th. You can see kind of some important dates right there. Toward the end of February, we'll have the full slate of bills. There were a number of education bills already filed. Expect quite a few more. We're going to go through some of them. In the interest of time, we won't go through all of them. Not a lot of movement happening right now on any of these. So until they get back and reconvene, there's not a whole lot to discuss in terms of what's moving. I did want to hit a couple of highlights. So House Bill 1 is important because this is the bill that will finalizing the drop in income tax in Kentucky to 4.5% this year. It then sets the stage to lower it another 0.5% on January 1 of next year to 4%. Obviously, for education, this is important because it will impact state revenues. It will clearly lower them. They're hopefully going to be offset by an expansion of the sales tax. So new industries, new businesses will be subject to the sales tax going forward. And at the same time, I think proponents think that lowering the income rate to 0 over time will make Kentucky a more competitive business environment, which should draw in new business and new taxpayers, and therefore, again, kind of expand the tax base and make up the difference in income tax through the sales tax expansion. So, but it is important to keep an eye on. So we'll watch it as we move forward. It passed out of the House. Look for it to move in the Senate once they get back fairly quickly and go to the governor for action. So another bill that is a repeat this year is House Bill 20. This is one that the department has been working on for a few years now. It was refiled by Representative Dossett. We'll hopefully get this one across the finish line. A little bit of interesting history here. A few years ago, this bill did manage to get out of both chambers, but I believe got held up by COVID before it got a chance to get to the governor for action. So hopefully we can get it back to the governor for action finally this year. So House Bill 30 is a bill relating to transgendered students. Again, this one would require students to use the facilities that correspond to their sex at birth, but provide that if a school has a student that identifies to a different gender, that different accommodations be provided for them. So we'll watch that one as we move forward. Next slide, please. You may have heard about House Bill 50 and Senate Bill 50 here lately in the news. These are identical companion bills. The part that pertains to us is that it would make school board elections partisan. So Leader Thayer in the Senate is one of the proponents of this. He filed SB 50. Representative Lockett in the House filed a companion. I think that their take is it would provide more transparency in that those running for these positions would have to identify with a certain party, and therefore people in their districts would have a better understanding of potentially where their policies and policies lie as it relates to party affiliation. I think you've seen a number of folks already come out in opposition to this. So it'll be interesting to see where this one goes. And it's kind of a difficult read right now. The bills are pretty expansive. It would make other things partisan, other races partisan as well, such as judicial races. So we may see this one get amended as we move forward. And some of these things make it and some don't. So we'll keep an eye on that. House Bill 88, if you watched the Governor's State of the Commonwealth last week, you may have heard mention of this. This is essentially the governor's proposal for education. So realistically, I don't think it's going to move forward, but it's probably important to go look at just to better understand what the administration is proposing. It was filed by Derek Graham here in Frankfurt. Trying to get this here. So you'll notice at the bottom of this slide, there's already been a number of bills filed relating to COVID vaccines, immunization exceptions, mask mandates, other health mandates. I doubt all of these move forward, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see some or all of these sort of rolled into one bill down the road later in the session. So we'll keep an eye on this, but obviously this is very topical. A lot of interest by the number of bills. I suspect we'll see a few more filed when they gavel back in next month. But like I said, I don't think we'll see all of these move forward. I think we'll probably see some effort at consolidation. Next slide, please. SB 20 is a true cleanup bill. This is exactly what the short session was originally intended for. So Leader Wilson in the Senate has filed this one. It's a follow-up to what he filed last year. Our Office of Career and Technical Education is already working on this one, so we'll keep you informed. Senate Bill 31 is related to concealed deadly weapons and would expand the carrying of those. In the past few sessions, similar bills have been filed but have not moved forward. So we'll see if the changes with the recent election make it more likely that this moves forward or not. With a lot of new members both in the House and Senate this year, we'll just have to kind of wait and see what the read is once they get back. Again, all these got filed last week. I don't believe any of the House bills have yet been assigned to committee. Some of the Senate bills were, but not a lot of movement on anything other than House Bill 1. So once they gavel back in, we'll start to see, what moves and what doesn't, and get a better understanding of where the new members in both chambers are on a lot of these different issues. Next slide, please. I think I have one more. So outside of the session news, I also just want to reiterate that it is yet again an election year. I'm sure you've begun seeing the ads for the gubernatorial primary, along with the governor's race. All the other constitutional offices are also up for election, so you'll start to see more about that. In addition to the primary and general election, we'll have two special elections to fill 2 state Senate seats. One voided when Member McGarvey became a member of Congress, and then the other when Senator Ralph Alvarado left to go lead Tennessee's Department of Public Health. So you can see the dates for those there. The date to register for that special election for the 28th state district wasn't announced. I didn't see, but it probably corresponds to the primary election deadline. So I would imagine it's April 17th as well. But keep those in mind. If you're in those districts, please make sure to get out and vote and encourage folks to do so. That's all I have. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out either now or when they gavel back in February. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Excellent summary of where we are right now. We did have a couple of questions that came in over the course of the webcast, one of which was around House Bill 563 and out-of-state students. We already addressed that one earlier on when Todd Allen was on talking about the court cases that are out there. Another question came in from my friend Steve Carter in McCracken County. Can we get a copy of the agenda in advance of these webcasts? Yes, Steve, we absolutely can do that. Thank you for asking that question. What our plan is right now is to go ahead and put that into the invitation, into the calendar invitation that you get for these, so it'll always be right there. There are sometimes some adjustments to these agendas as they get developed, so we'll just keep updating it in the calendar invitation. That way it should show up for all of you and you have the most up-to-date agenda that's out there, but thank you for that. And then another question, and if Thomas, if you're on, maybe you can answer this one for us, came in about the equity playbook. Can parents, some parents or education advocates, community leaders attend the equity playbook cohort or the training related to that? So I'm not sure, Thomas, if you have the capacity to take on advocates, community leaders at those, or what are your thoughts on that? Or is it something you want to talk about with your team? Oh, we may have lost Thomas along the way. We'll give him just a second. Okay, looks like Thomas has dropped off for something, so we'll make sure we get that question answered and circle back and let everybody know the answer to that. Our next webcast is going to be, let me bring the date up here. February 14th, Valentine's Day. So everybody can look forward to that. The next superintendent webcast. And again, we'll make sure that we've got that information on what's on the agenda posted ahead of time. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope that the start to your New Year's is going great. And please never hesitate to let us know if the department or I can ever be of service. Thanks so much.